Welcome to a deep dive on managing conflict, a comprehensive look at how supervisors can navigate conflict at work. I'm Amanda Wolford, a consultant with talent strategy within the Office of Human Resources. And joining me today is Emily Tichich, who is an instructional designer within the Supervisory Development Program. Everything we'll touch on today is based on what research and leading practices say about what works in managing conflict. I'm certain you have seen trainings or resources on conflict many times before, so some of this information might sound familiar. However, it's what you do with it and the impact it makes that matters. Keep in mind that conflict is a fluid and dynamic process, and every situation is different. Next, we're going to walk through a conflict example so you can see how conflict management
Hold
skills.
on, hold on, Amanda. Didn't we decide yesterday to start by busting some common myths about conflict? Remember?
Oh, I didn't know you changed this up. I thought we had decided to start with an example of conflict.
No, no, I'm sorry, Amanda. I just think there are so many myths about conflict that we should start there. I'm the lead designer on the deep dive. Let's just do it this way.
Okay, I guess what you say goes, though you're kind of being a jerk about it.
I'm getting really sick of your bad attitude. Maybe if you paid more attention when we practiced this yesterday, this wouldn't have happened.
Well, maybe if you'd listen to any of my ideas, we wouldn't be messing this up in front of our audience.
Amanda, remind me again, which one of us is the course designer?
And that matters why?
Guys, just a reminder, we're recording right now.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. All right, everyone, it's okay. Just to be clear, this was not a real argument. We were demonstrating how easy it is for simple disagreement about work to spill over into personal conflict and turn into disrespectful behavior. We're going to spend the rest of our time looking at sources of conflict, how to unpack them, and ultimately seek solutions, all in a productive way. Okay, so we played that up a little bit for dramatic effect, but that's certainly not a good way to approach conflict. What Emily did there was offer a zero-sum approach. I'm the instructional designer, so we're going to do it my way. Let's face it, conflict is uncomfortable at times. It might make you feel anxious, like you failed or cannot solve a problem. You might want to avoid the conflict altogether, but generally that does not help the situation. Emily and I are going to spend the rest of the time with you, not arguing, but giving you tips on conflict sources and skills to tackle them. So instead of blaming and undermining and all the other ugly things that come along with conflict, there's definitely a better way to manage it. What Emily could have done better is manage her emotions, communicated ahead of time, and had my agreement before we went live. And I didn't have to take the bait, per se, and react like I did and call her a jerk. If you were Emily's supervisor, what would your role be in this conflict? What would you do to address the conflict? You'd likely need to give her feedback and coaching on the situation and set the performance expectation that she be more respectful to the members of the team. Keep in mind that toxic behavior that is tolerated in the workplace sets the tone for the culture, and that can really backfire. Conflict is actually very healthy and normal in the workplace. Yes, I did say it was healthy and normal, but when it becomes personal and emotional, that's not healthy. When managed effectively, conflict can benefit us by opening our eyes to new ideas, building more effective teams by fostering trust, improving relationships, and a renewed confidence in their ability to work together, and self-awareness in the fact that conflict forces us to examine our own goals and expectations more closely, helping us see the things that are most important not only to ourselves, but to other people as well. And speaking of self-awareness, it's the first step in the ready, set, go framework of managing conflict. The rest of this deep dive will focus on this framework, and up first is getting ready, or looking inward and assessing how we view conflict, which defines how we handle conflict. The practices and examples we'll share are designed to be useful across many types of work. As you learn the material presented today, think about the people you supervise and consider the nature of the work they do, along with their individual needs. As mentioned before, a lot of this information may not be new, but it's how you apply it and the impact it will have. And most importantly, apply your judgment about what will work for the people you supervise. This is critical for effective conflict management. With conflict, most people fall into the category of either a conflict avoider or conflict seeker. Think about your tendencies when it comes to conflict. Are you an avoider or seeker or both? Conflict seekers generally value directness and honesty over harmony and relationships, and avoiders value the opposite. They want the harmony. If you answered both, that's very natural to sometimes seek and sometimes avoid. You might be more of a seeker with those closest to you, family, spouse, etc., or more of an avoider in other situations. Neither approach is better or worse, but it's important to know your tendency and go from there. After all, it's about having the self-awareness of yourself and the others involved. Being aware of how you work with others to achieve results is just as important as achieving the results. So what are your strengths and development needs when it comes to conflict? Do you listen to understand another person, or do you wait for your turn to make a point? There's an interactive self-assessment available in the Get Ready section of the Managing Conflict module of the Supervising website that will help you evaluate your behaviors and development needs. The assessment scores will help you increase your self-awareness and focus on the areas that you want to improve as it relates to conflict management. You can find a link to the self-assessment and competency model in the description of this deep dive and on hr.umn.edu/supervising. So once you know how you come across and which conflict skills you need to work on, it's important to take a closer look at the conflict situation itself. This is the get set piece of the framework. Conflict at work often stems from one or more of these conflict sources. Understanding the 4 root causes of a conflict will help you figure out how to manage it more effectively, which may lead to solutions that resolve the conflict. First, task, which is differing ideas about what work will be done, including plans, ideas, projects, or goals. Process, differing ideas about how to get the work done, including methods for making decisions and the steps and people involved in getting things done. Status, differing ideas about who is in charge or deserves credit for the work. And relationship, interpersonal conflict involving anger and hurt feelings. I'm not going to spend time going through each one because we want to spend the rest of this deep dive teaching you some of the skills that will help you manage any source of conflict. We do have a quick guide and a video on the sources of conflict that you can find in the description of this deep dive. So back to this quote-unquote argument that Emily and I had at the beginning of this deep dive, probably came across as a relationship conflict because in that moment, that's what it was. Emily was undermining me and throwing her weight around. You could also say it was a status conflict. Who's the designer and who isn't? But getting to the root cause of her wanting to talk about conflict myths before we talked about conflict sources would signify a process conflict, or how the work was to get done and decision-making around it. Oftentimes, conflict needs to be unpacked as it can be a very dynamic and fluid process, and there are certain skills you can enhance to help you through it. Emily will talk about those skills in just a moment, but before she does that, you'll want to keep in mind that most conflicts don't fit nicely into just one type, and there are often layers. An example of a layer would be a task conflict that has worsened over time and now includes relationship conflict. Conflict may be uncomfortable, but it can be productive and is a part of life. The key is understanding the root cause of the conflict and having a plan to manage it effectively. As a supervisor, many of the conflicts you have to deal with involve members of your team or department and may not directly involve you. In these cases, instead of applying these skills yourself, your job may be to provide feedback and coaching to others so that they can learn and apply these skills. Okay, now that we've talked about what you bring to conflict management and how to prepare to manage conflicts by assessing the source, Emily is going to walk you through the key skills you can use to manage conflict at work.
Thanks, Amanda. As a supervisor, when you're aware of conflict involving members of your team or department, you may need to get involved. It's critical for you to get involved when the conflict makes it hard for you or others in your department to do the work. So consider, does the conflict affect performance and productivity? If you know that it does, or think that it might, then it's important for you to get involved. Is the conflict disruptive? Does someone feel disrespected? Is the conflict causing someone who's performing well to consider finding another job to get away from it? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then it's your role to get involved. Does someone's behavior fail to meet expectations for how they are to get their work done? If so, then you will need to address this behavior. As a supervisor, your role in managing conflict involves providing clear expectations for how people on your team work with others. You also need to address behavior that fails to meet these expectations. You can do this as part of ongoing check-ins. For example, if two people in your department are being disrespectful to each other and calling each other names, then you would reiterate the expectation that they show respect for each other at all times while at work. Then, as you have ongoing check-ins to discuss performance and development, you would talk about how they're doing in any instances when they're being disrespectful. In a case like this, you would use skills related to managing performance. You can find more information on managing and evaluating performance on the supervising website at hr.umn.edu/supervising and in the description of this deep dive. In addition to setting expectations and addressing performance issues, your role also involves providing feedback to help the people reporting to you to be aware of any problematic behavior and the impact that that has on others, and to coach them on how to approach a conflict situation productively. In the example of two people on your team being disrespectful to each other, you would provide feedback on specific instances of disrespectful behavior, focusing on the situation, the behavior, and the impact of that behavior on others. Then, you would coach them on what to do differently in the future. For more on giving feedback and coaching others, check out our feedback and coaching materials in the description of this deep dive. Before we dive into the rest of the skills, a quick note. You will be using these skills yourself, and as a supervisor, you'll also be coaching others to use these skills. Helping others to improve their conflict management skills is a good way to ensure that members of your team or department can work out many disagreements without you even needing to get involved. The next step in managing conflict is to manage emotions, which is about staying calm and helping others keep their anger and frustration in check. When dealing with conflict, it's not uncommon to feel angry, anxious, or frustrated. For example, you may be trying hard to listen to another person and to let them know that you value your relationship with them, but they continue to blame you, make accusations, or even call you names. Even the most even-keeled person would feel frustrated. The problem is that anger and frustration make it difficult to focus on the problem in a productive way. When we react out of anger, we're likely to say and do things that make the conflict worse, and make it more likely the others involved will also react out of anger. Also, emotions are contagious, especially those of a supervisor. If you act angry or frustrated, the people on your team are going to get angry and frustrated too. So as a supervisor, when you're able to stay calm and rational, the people on your team will also better be able to stay calm and rational. A simple but powerful technique to keep anger and frustration in check is to pause and take a timeout before responding to something that has provoked you. Take a deep breath or two, go for a walk, spend a few minutes venting to someone you trust who can help you calm down, or just sleep on it and respond a day or two later. This technique can especially be helpful when a conflict catches you by surprise. For example, if you're presenting your ideas at a meeting and someone surprises you with a bunch of criticism and challenging questions, you may be tempted to respond with anger. Instead of blurting out whatever pops into your mind, which is likely to be filled with negative emotion, this would be a good time to pause, take a deep breath, and consider how to respond. Or if you can bring yourself to do it, maybe thank the person for their thoughts and say that you'll get back to them later with your response. Remember when Amanda and I got into an argument at the beginning of this deep dive? Neither one of us paused or took a deep breath before responding. Had one of us done this, maybe I wouldn't have made a snarky comment about her bad attitude, and maybe Amanda wouldn't have called me a jerk in front of our audience. In fact, even if this had been real, I could have avoided the whole conflict by saying something like, "Oh, I'm sorry for changing things up at the last minute. Here, why don't you use a copy of the slides? We're on slide 6. It might have been a bit embarrassing for us to say this in front of a live audience, but we could have moved quickly past the conflict. Emotions can escalate fast, and pausing before speaking can save you a lot of grief and additional conflict. When you need to pause and take a deep breath, follow a 3-step process to focus your mind and give yourself time to calm down so you can respond productively. First, be aware of yourself. Consider, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What is your body posture? Is your heart pounding? In that moment, consciously reduce your energy level. Take a deep breath, notice if your muscles are tense, and try to relax them. Second, be aware of what is around you. Notice what's in the room. What sounds do you hear? Who are the people around you? Third, look at the person in front of you. What is their facial expression, their tone of voice, their body posture? These 3 steps will help you to focus on yourself, your surroundings, and the other people in the room. This may only take a couple of seconds, but you'll find that you've calmed down enough to possibly respond more productively. It's also important to know that people differ in how quickly they get angry, how intense these feelings are, and how long these feelings last. If you're someone whose emotions are quick to appear and can be pretty strong, then this technique will also be especially helpful. And if you're coaching someone like this, helping them to manage their emotions is an important step. A note about email. It's often tempting to vent frustration through email. There's usually no harm in merely writing such an email, but sending it is often a mistake that makes the conflict worse and fails to resolve anything. If you're tempted to write an email, leave it in your drafts mailbox for a day or two. Come back to it and reread it or have a colleague provide feedback. Consider how the recipient is likely to respond. Think about how you would react if you received this email from someone else. If it seems unlikely to be helpful, find another way to share your views. If you find yourself on the receiving end of a hostile or angry email and you need to respond, it's important to be assertive but not aggressive or passive. You can do this by keeping your email brief, focusing on just the facts and information you want to share, keeping it professional and friendly, or at least neutral, and be firm and confident in your position on an issue. Avoid personal attacks or criticism, sarcasm, threats, or making it sound like you're open to discussing or considering something when in fact you're not. And when focusing on the facts, that means sharing the information that you want to share, not pointing out all of the inaccurate or wrong information the other person may have shared. That will just keep the conflict escalating. A red flag that the email you're about to send might escalate the conflict is that you have written more than one or two short paragraphs. In general, when dealing with conflict, the longer the email, the more likely it is to escalate things rather than calm them down. Another technique is to use assertive, non-reactive statements. This means being clear about your point of view, as well as your feelings and expectations, while not reacting emotionally or saying something that might provoke the other person. So, taking this approach will calm things down and make it easier to have a rational conversation. One way to do this is to talk about what you see, feel, hope, or expect. For example, you might say, "Next time, I hope you can step back and think about how you will respond to your colleagues before you send a long, angry email." Or, "I expect the two of you to be respectful and listen to each other." Another effective method is to use the format when you, I feel, because. For example, when you change your mind about a decision and don't let me know right away, I feel frustrated because I can't do my job effectively. In the role play at the beginning of this deep dive, Amanda might have approached me afterward and said, "When you talk about how you're the designer and I'm not, I feel hurt and angry because it seems like you don't value what I have to say." This technique is a good way to let the other person know how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way, without triggering defensiveness or blaming the other person for your feelings. It can also be effective to use the format, "I noticed that, and I assume that, is it true?" For example, in our role play, afterward I might have said to Amanda, "I noticed you didn't have the most recent version of the slides, and I assume that is because you forgot to check your email this morning. Is that right?" This is a good way to check your assumptions. Incorrect assumptions are often a cause of conflict. In this case, maybe Amanda did check her email, but I accidentally sent the previous version of the slides. Instead of being angry with her, I need to focus on being more organized. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't check my assumptions. Keep in mind that people differ in how confident they are in their assumptions. If you're someone who usually thinks you're right, you may be unintentionally causing or escalating conflict because you are acting from false assumptions. The key is to check your assumptions. For those of you in research roles, think of them as a hypothesis. Collect some data by asking questions to test whether your hypothesis is true. Just like in research, the data usually tell a different story than we're expecting. Our assumptions about why someone is doing something are often wrong. Another important tip is to ask what versus why questions. Asking what focuses the discussion on behaviors and impact, which is more productive. Asking why often feels like an accusation and puts people on the defensive. For example, if after two of your employees have an argument, you ask, "Why did you do that?" It's likely to sound blaming and accusatory. If you ask, "What happened back there between the two of you?" this is more likely to lead to a productive conversation. If you want to get better at this skill, pay attention over the next week and notice when you ask another person why they did something. Try turning these into what questions, and you'll find you get more information and a better understanding of what actually happened and why it happened. Finally, one other technique for non-reactive statements is to use the word "and" instead of "but." For example, if you say, "I know you want to start on this new project, but we need to get our current one done first." It sounds like you disagree with the person's desire to start on the new project. However, if you say, "I know you want to start on this new project and we need to get our current one done first," it sounds like you support the person's desire to get started. Substituting "and" for "but" is a simple technique that can have significant impact on how the other person responds to you. Sometimes other people are good at knowing what to say to provoke you. This is called pushing your buttons or taking the bait. You know this is happening when you find yourself wanting to respond aggressively, or you want to just give up and avoid the issue altogether. For example, in our role play at the beginning of this deep dive, one of my hot buttons is when I think I look disorganized in front of other people. When Amanda didn't have the final version of the slides, this immediately made me feel embarrassed and angry. She wasn't doing it intentionally, but then I responded by telling her what to do because I'm the instructional designer. Well, being told what to do is one of Amanda's hot buttons, so things quickly escalated into name calling. Had we each been more mindful of our hot buttons, we might have been able to recognize that we were pushing each other's buttons and really just making things worse. It can be helpful to anticipate the specific situations, people, or topics that can quickly trigger anger or frustration, your hot buttons. We all have them. Think about how you might respond in a calm and rational way. It helps to actually rehearse the words you would say. For example, say you know that in a meeting later today, Mark, who's a supervisor from another unit, is going to bring up an issue from 10 years ago, like he always does, and you're going to get really angry, as you always do. You can rehearse what you might say when Mark brings this up. Maybe also rehearse taking a deep breath before you respond. As a supervisor, you can help others to become more aware of their hot buttons and to strategize ways of responding more productively. It can feel silly, but role-playing difficult situations with someone you trust is a very good way of building more effective self-control skills. As a supervisor, role-playing combined with feedback and coaching is a great way to help others get better at managing conflict. One way to avoid triggering other people's hot buttons is to avoid presenting information or a decision as a crisis that needs to be resolved immediately. Give the person time to process the information and time to consider any decisions. In other words, give them time to manage their own emotions. Another important step in managing conflict is to build trust. Even if you're starting with little trust or even some hostility, it's important to build whatever trust you can with the others involved. This may not be easy, especially when you're dealing with difficult behavior from another person, but even a little trust can go a long way. You won't likely succeed without it. One of the most important skills that builds trust is what is called reflective listening. This involves two steps. First, focus on hearing what the other person is saying in order to understand what they're thinking and how they're feeling. This means giving your full attention to the other person and not to what you want to say in response. The second step in reflective listening is to say back to the other person what you hear them saying in your own words. If they don't agree that you've gotten it right, then ask them to help you get it right. The goal is for the other person to agree that you understand what they are trying to communicate. Let's talk about how you do this. First, it's important to use open-ended questions rather than closed questions. Closed questions are those that are answered with just a word or two and don't give the other person a chance to explain their thoughts. For example, you could ask, "Did you send an email to her about the decision you made?" That's a closed question. It's answered with a yes or a no. Sure, the person could say more, but by asking a yes or no question, you've communicated intentionally or not that you aren't interested in hearing more. In contrast, open-ended questions give the person a chance to share more information and explanation. For example, if you ask, "What did you say in the email you sent to her about the decision?" This communicates you're interested in hearing the full story and understanding their point of view. Here's a simple exercise you can do to get better at this. Over the next week, notice when you ask closed questions. Practice turning them into open-ended questions. If you do this, you'll find you have much more helpful and informative conversations. You might even resolve a conflict or two before they become big issues. Another important part of reflective listening is to encourage the person to clarify what they're thinking and how they're feeling. For example, you could ask, "It sounds like you're not sure why he disagreed with you in the meeting. Is that right?" Or, "Could you give me an example of that?" These are clarifying questions. The goal is to give the person a chance to clarify their perspective. It also helps to let them know you are trying to understand them. For example, you could say, "It must be really frustrating when she says one thing to you in the meeting and then does something completely different." Or, "I imagine you're feeling stuck because you have to work with him on this project, but he isn't getting his part done on time." Demonstrating empathy doesn't mean that you agree with the other person's perspective. It just means you try to understand it. And this is important in building trust. Once you believe you understand what the other person is thinking and feeling, a powerful technique is to summarize and paraphrase what you've heard. For example, you could say you want his input into the design of your project, but you find his sarcastic comments aggravating. Am I right about that? Or, "It sounds like the expectations for how the two of you are to work together are unclear. How can I clarify this for you?" If the other person disagrees with what you've said, listen carefully to what they say and try again until they agree that you've got it right. Remember, they are the expert in what they're trying to say. A common trap is to get hung up on trying to pick apart or analyze their words. You'll know when you're doing this and when you find yourself trying to tell them what they are saying. To listen effectively, be sure not to interrupt the other person or start sharing your own views until you have shown that you understand what the other person is saying. It's also important to avoid giving advice, changing the subject, or judging what the other person is saying. For example, it won't be helpful to say, "You should just tell him you won't put up with this anymore. You're being a pushover. I'm only trying to help." Saying something like this guarantees the other person will not feel heard and understood, and it won't feel like you're trying to help. The key to reflective listening is to focus entirely on trying to understand the other person's point of view. If you're someone who likes to give advice, hold this in check or it will sabotage your listening skills and make it harder to build trust. Reflective listening provides you with an accurate understanding of what someone is thinking and how they're feeling, making it easier for you to reduce interpersonal conflict and also address the underlying problem or source of the conflict. It also helps the other person build more self-awareness and possibly gain a new perspective and also feel heard. Another important part of building trust is letting others know that the relationships are a priority to you and that you respect and value the people involved. This is called building rapport and will make it more likely others will be willing to work with you to resolve a conflict. There are 3 simple ways to do this. The first is to talk about the importance of trust, fairness, and the other person's cooperativeness. For example, saying, "I appreciate your willingness to sit down and talk about this difficult issue," or "I know we disagree about this decision. I really want to figure out how we can restore trust between us." When you tell the other person that you want to build trust and that you value fairness and that you see how they're trying to be cooperative, even if it's just a little bit, the other person is likely to reciprocate and see you as genuinely wanting to work things out. The second technique is to talk about the greater good, such as, "We share the same goal of fixing this problem," or "We both want our department to be successful." Statements about shared goals can help the other person see how cooperating with you and resolving the conflict can help both of you. This sets the stage for finding common ground and also coming to an agreement that benefits you both. The third technique is to talk about building the relationship, such as, "I want to help you figure this out," or "I want you to be successful." Emphasizing that you want to have a supportive, cooperative relationship helps the other person trust you and also see you as someone who can help rather than as an adversary or a competitor. These simple techniques create more cooperativeness in the other people involved and can pave the way for finding common ground. One of the reasons disagreement can feel so difficult is it often feels like a competition. Someone will win and someone will lose. Your gain is my loss. You can tell when someone sees disagreement as a competition. They won't want to share information with you. They won't try to understand what you need or want. They'll make a big deal out of differences in your goals and interests rather than talk about what you have in common. And they might try to get what they want at your expense. For most of us, this is how we experience disagreement and conflict. The trouble is, this is often wrong. Usually, there are solutions to a conflict that do not require one side to win and the other to lose. Instead, solutions exist that will allow everyone to get something that they need. There are a set of specific skills that will help you to identify win-win solutions. Before looking for solutions, define the problem in a way that is mutually acceptable. Ask questions and share information about how each person sees the problem, the goals, and the obstacles to reaching the goals. For example, asking, "What do you see as the real issue here?" Or "What do you think is getting in the way of solving this problem?" Once you agree on the problem, discuss each person's interests, needs, and priorities. For example, asking, "It sounds like timing is a big issue for you. What would you like the timing to be?" Or, "Cost is an important issue for me. I need you to be sure that there's not an increase over last year." The goal is to create a mutual understanding of what each person needs. As you unpack the conflict, it's helpful to restate and summarize what each side is saying until you all agree that you have accurately described each side's priorities. For example, saying, "We need to come up with one set of recommendations that we both agree on. The biggest obstacle has been that we don't know what each other's priorities are. It's important to you that whatever we recommend fits within the budget for this year and doesn't require you to ask for more money. I need to get upgraded equipment for the labs. Is this accurate?" This is a very important and very powerful technique. In fact, the single most helpful skill in this entire deep dive would probably be restating and summarizing what each side is saying until you all agree that you have accurately described each side's priorities. Once you know the interests, the needs, and the priorities of everyone involved, you have what you need to start looking for an agreement that works for everyone. There are a number of techniques that will help you find that agreement. First, it's always helpful to talk about common goals and interests. What does everybody agree on already? For example, we all want to figure out how to come up with the money and staffing to get this project done, or we're all interested in solving this problem once and for all. Right away, rule out any options that participants agree are unworkable. A common mistake is to keep trying to convince the other person of something they see as off the table, and that's simply not an option. The other person will probably respond to this by defending their positions even more strongly. A big part of reaching an agreement is finding trade-offs that benefit everyone in some way. What do you have that the other wants? What do you both have that you can trade? What are you each comfortable giving away? And or are there issues that are more important to one person than another? If so, trade-offs are possible. To do this, you'll need more than one issue. So if you find yourself in a conflict over a single issue for which you and the other person have opposite preferences, it can be helpful to find additional issues to include. This creates the possibility of trade-offs. For example, you might offer to give the other person what they want on one issue if they give you what you want on a different issue. So say another supervisor is asking for some time from your team to work on a big project. You might agree to this if they agree to support you in extending the timeline on a different project so you have more time to get it done. You're trading off your team's time for an extended deadline on another project, making the agreement workable for everyone. As you identify possible options for an agreement, be sure to summarize them so you're all on the same page. It's usually a good idea to keep decisions on individual issues tentative until a final proposal is complete. Also, getting everyone's commitment to final agreement is an important part of making sure there's follow-through. Getting commitment in writing, such as by including it in meeting minutes or in an email, can also be effective. As you try these techniques to help you manage a conflict, don't forget to consider the source of the conflict, task, process, relationship, and status. For example, if two people are frustrated and angry with each other and disagree about how to get their work done, you'll need to help them calm down and manage their emotions before they'll be able to have a productive conversation and find common ground on how to get the work done. The conflict management skills we've just reviewed will serve you well in dealing with the conflicts you face in your day-to-day work. Keep in mind that as a supervisor, you'll also be coaching others in how to use these skills. The more comfortable you are using these skills and the more experience you have with them, the more you'll be able to coach others to manage conflict effectively. For help with feedback and coaching skills, take a look at the supervising website at hr.umn.edu/supervising. Thank you so much for joining us for this Managing Conflict Deep Dive.